energy sector in the Philippines, I'd say, is still emerging, with both the onshore and offshore projects gaining momentum as the country aims to expand its renewable energy ambition and capacity. We can see that in the latest World Bank report. It's saying we have 178 gigawatt of potential, and we're seeing more and more developers applying for sites in the Philippines. And the hope is within the next 5 years, we are geared to realize the vision of, having the first kilowatt hour delivered into the grid.
Offshore wind is a big topic in the Pacific region, with governments and agencies looking to commission new projects and build the next generation of renewable energy. We're talking to Anne Francisco, Country Manager for the Philippines at GWEC, to discuss the Q4 developments in offshore wind projects in the Philippines. We'll hear expert opinions and discuss how offshore wind could impact the energy sector across the Philippines. Anne's role within GWEC is to push for policies that will help enable the wind sector in the country. Part of the job is establishing a platform within the industry by which the stakeholders can work on the key work streams and pillars for offshore wind. So, hi Anne, how are you today?
Hi Matt, I'm good. I'm fine in general. Thank you.
Great, excellent. So just to talk us a little bit about what you're doing at the moment with GWEC in the region, can you talk us through what the wind energy sector looks like in the Philippines at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. The wind energy sector in the Philippines, I'd say, is still emerging, with both the onshore and offshore projects gaining momentum as the country aims to expand its renewable energy ambition and capacity. Right now, there's really growing interest in offshore wind in particular, just because of the favorable wind resource in the Philippines, and that's we can see that in the latest World Bank report. It's saying we have 178 gigawatt of potential. So that sort of kicked off the industry. We saw a lot of both local and international developers coming into the Philippines, exploring the opportunity of developing offshore wind within the country. And right now, I think as of October or November 2024, we have more than 65 gigawatt worth of capacity. I think for the government side, they're continuously working on ensuring that the regulatory environment remains favorable for the sector. So we're seeing policies, frameworks are being put in place to ensure that the sector is further enabled. It will work for the developers and the banks, de-risking the sector, ensuring the bankability of these projects. So we've seen the marine spatial plans and permitting frameworks being established specific to the offshore wind. These, coupled with the interest from the private sector and the support as well from the financial institutions, I think that's the reason why the offshore wind sector in particularly is gaining momentum, and we're seeing more and more developers applying for sites in the Philippines. And the hope is within the next 5 years, we are geared to realize the vision of having the first kilowatt hour delivered into the grid. Government, private sector, even the NGOs and CSO are, I think, facing the same direction, and that's to realize the RE vision for the Philippines.
Great, so just to look into GWEC's work in a little bit more detail, what are the kind of key takeaways and the key pillars for 2024?
Yeah, I think it is important. It was really important for me to map out the priority areas for offshore wind in the Philippines. And when I started working for GWEC, that was what I did first. It's essentially trying to understand the whole ecosystem of stakeholders involved in the offshore wind sector in the Philippines, identify what they're already doing, because for sure the government, other agencies, other associations are already contributing to the advancement of offshore wind in the country. From there, I also try to understand if there are still gaps that need to be filled, and then GWEC worked on building that collaborative stance, that platform with the agencies, the government agencies, and even the local associations and other key stakeholders to work on the gaps. That's the reason why we sort of started mapping that, just because it's important to work on synergies. And so, for example, we knew that the whole marine spatial plan and permitting, these are important and priority work streams for any country that would want to pursue offshore wind. And we know for the Philippines, our government is already working on that. They have ETP, Carbon Trust, managing the efforts, while key consulting firms are also working on the actual project. So it's being done, but again, through that mapping exercise, we found out that the efforts are mostly concentrated on getting the lens from the government side, meaning how does our environmental sector, environment agency would think about the marine use, how other key government agencies would prioritize how to use the marine space, but not getting the feedback still from the developer's point of view, which would essentially develop the offshore wind. So we saw that as a potential gap. So that's where we stepped in and worked with the local developer association and offshore wind developers in getting access to that process, that whole marine spatial planning process and permitting process, and just understand how we can sort of improve on that using the lens of the experienced developers, right? I mean, these developers have already mobilized offshore wind projects in other jurisdictions, and they can definitely add additional, layer of understanding on how the government can roll out this, very important work stream for the Philippines. And we sort of facilitated that, and again, GWEC didn't do the whole thing, but sort of just understood understanding the gaps and how we could fill it up. So that's what we did for this particular work stream. And we did the same for the others that we deem as priority pillars for the sector. So we identified financing as a key pillar, port development is infrastructure development in general, auction again as a key offtake mechanism for offshore wind. So we tried to start building the capacity, amplify the message on bankability and shared risks through our workshops, position papers. We also did a quick study trip to Taiwan to see how offshore wind is being developed from an Asian neighbor point of view as well. So we did these things and tried to be additive to the already existing efforts coming from the government and other stakeholders. So we mobilized our plans this 2024, and that's how I would say, successfully were able to touch on these different aspects and work on the relationship amongst the key stakeholders within the sector.
No, that's great. It sounds like there's a lot of impetus and there's a lot of energy for the transition in the country, and the government is
Mm,
doing their best. Obviously, it sounds like they're
yeah.
listening and they're working towards that. So on the flip
Yeah.
side of that, obviously, at the time of recording this podcast, we've got COP29. There's a lot of talk. It's big at the
Yes.
moment. There's a lot of conversations going on. So in looking at the roadmap for the next 5 years, does the Philippines have a kind of government agreed roadmap for, say, is it 2028 or 2030?
Yeah. The government DOE recently released the what we call the Philippine Energy Plan. So that's until 2050. So with that plan, it sort of enshrines the vision for the RE capacity or share for the Philippines. So we have a vision of 35% RE share by 2030, so that's in the next few years, and then a 50% share of RE within the grid by 2050. Looking at the vast opportunity, there are two scenarios that the government is looking at right now. We have the Clean Energy Scenario One, or CES One, they call it, wherein it's mobilizing 19 gigawatt, right, worth of capacity from offshore wind by 2050. So that's the clean energy scenario one. And you'd have the more aggressive scenario, which is CES 2, their clean energy scenario 2, wherein the offshore wind could be as high as 50 gigawatt. So in terms of this opportunity for offshore wind, it's between 19 to 50 gigawatt. It's still a huge capacity to work on, but by the year 2050. So it allows that I'd say, enough of a timeline for the developers and for the sector in general to catch up, really push on the technology and enabling mechanisms to realize this very aggressive RE and offshore wind vision by 2050.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that was leading into my next question a little bit. So just to kind of get a bit more understanding of what currently is happening and what the objectives are. But obviously, in looking at that, there are also challenges with implementing these projects and implementing, the funding side of it. Government regulations, government guidance changing, and so on. So what are the challenges in delivering on these objectives, and how is the government, the industry, and GWEC working to address these?
These are very huge tasks. I mean, enabling the offshore wind. And to be fair to the government, they understand this. They understood this assignment, this very tall order, and they have taken every step to ensure that again we start realizing the vision. It's still taking so much political will, ambition, grit, and fortitude, and also the knowledge. Right? I mean, the everything is anchored to that knowledge that there is a huge potential for RE, and it's about enabling the sector to make it happen. But still, even with that, despite that, and despite the government really working together really well with the private sector, there are inherent, I'd say, challenges, as you mentioned. For example, infrastructure, and it's not unique to the Philippines. I guess other markets have encountered this too. This challenge or constraint. Just the grid alone, are we able to upgrade our grids on time to be able to accept this huge capacity coming from offshore wind, and anchored to that would be the availability of funds to make it happen as well. So again, when we talk about infrastructure, we also talk about the ports, and again, anchored to that would be, well, where do we get the funds for that? That's why I said it's inherent, because I think other markets have experienced this as well, and we're experiencing that. And these are still challenges because we try to unravel how we can get things moving, especially on the infra side, as mentioned, the port and the grid. And these are the key, I say, the key things to de-risk the sector as a whole, right? I mean, talking to banks as well, these are, if not the top, would be the top two things they're trying to understand and assess, right? Even if you're a big project developer, you're committed to doing your project, are you able to commit, are you able to connect to the grid? So that sort of gives the risk assignment to that specific project or to that specific country high, because then it goes beyond just the developers, and it we're now looking into the government. And in this case, our grid operator is a private firm, so we're looking at that entity to align itself with the vision, right? So these are the typical challenges and constraints we encounter. The sector, the stakeholders within the sector are very much open to working with each other. Developers associations such as GWEC, the local associations, we call the WEDAP, or the Wind Energy Developers Association of the Philippines, and Power, Filipinas Offshore Wind Energy Resources Inc. We have both the local banks and international banks feeding into what they think is a best case scenario for risk sharing and de-risking and bankability. We have funds, and even the multilaterals like World Bank and ADB chiming in, even the grants, philanthropics. These same stakeholders present in other countries are also within and present in the Philippines, and it's fortunate to see that everyone is working together to make it happen. And there are available resources that can be mobilized to further support the government, technical assistance, for example. And we've seen these provided to the government, resulting to technical papers, reports, feasibility studies that again further help the sector be more knowledgeable in further de-risking the sector. So it is imperative that both the government and the sector, private sector, even the CSOs and NGOs work together toward the same direction, and that is, we all want the same thing, realizing the 50% RE share by 2050. As a sector, we're moving towards unlocking and unraveling, and yeah, to make offshore wind and RE in general happen.
Yeah, cool. And it is a global industry with global players in it. You know, these companies have stakes all
Yes,
over the world.
that's true. That's true, and that's why we, as an emerging market, it's also very important for us to see the best practices, and also to learn from, I'd say, the mistakes as well. I mean, we see the news on other markets, what we think would be good to apply in the Philippines, what best not to apply in the Philippines as well. So I think that's one of the advantages of, being an emerging market, and wherein you have other markets and jurisdictions to look at, I guess, and take in what you can take in, and leave out what you think is not applicable to the Philippines. But there, as I mentioned, there are, knowledge out there that we could definitely look into, and it's made available, fortunately, because developers are very much willing to share, banks are very much willing to share, and it's that global flow of ideas and information that's sort of enabling this transition, RE transition, faster. I'd say not as fast as the information flow, but maybe the resources as well, right? The mobilization of resources and funds, also geared towards EMDs, emerging markets, such as the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely, which makes sense. So yeah, really great information there. So my last question really is, we've looked at what GWEC doing right now with the country, with the government, and the stuff that's happening
Mm.
at the moment. But are there any other initiatives that GWEC are involved with in the Philippines that are supporting the growth in the market in the next year and the year after?
Yeah, no, we're committed to working within the Philippines in the next years to come, right? I mean, for offshore wind, we definitely would want to see the first projects to come in again in the next 5 years. But that's fixed, right? We have the fixed bottom. Out of the 178 gigawatt opportunity for the Philippines, 80% of that is actually from the floating technology. So that means still being able to realize the vision whilst understanding how technology evolves and how we can adapt to that. Because again, a huge part of the opportunity is coming from that technology. So definitely, while we're developing the frameworks for fixed bottom, there's still an opportunity to understand how we can further mobilize the floating technology for the Philippines. But that's sort of the very long term view, right, for the Philippines. I mean, the short term to medium term, we are launching our supply chain report this year. So we have our APAC summit. It will happen in Korea, in Incheon, Korea, this from November 26th to 28th. So we just commissioned our supply chain report. It's really to understand the local industries, the Philippine industries, and how it could support offshore wind development in the Philippines, and maybe get a glimpse of Philippines' potential in participating as a hub, right? Or how it can participate in the wider APAC offshore wind opportunity. So we're finalizing that report, and again, yeah, as I mentioned, we will be launching that in Korea. We will also be launching that in the Philippines. Of course, it's made for the Philippine stakeholders. So this December, we will have a sort of an industry Thanksgiving thing. We're working together with the two local associations, WEDAP and Power, and part of the program would be the official Philippine official launch of this supply chain report. Closing 2024 with that launching, but definitely for year 2025, we intend to continuously work with the government, with the local association. In fact, we are mobilizing an offshore wind auction technical working group to support the government in its upcoming auctions for offshore wind. So we have developers and banks as members of that working group. We aim to continue on capacity building, capacity building exercises geared towards the government agencies, especially that offshore wind is a new technology in the Philippines, right? And the whole permitting, the whole environmental and social safeguards, even the grid, right? How do we ensure that we take in this much capacity? So all of these, we're trying to build on the knowledge and to impart that towards the, again, the government agency. So that would be the, I guess, the key pillars that we will be pushing forward for year 2025. There are four identified local industries that we can really work on to upgrade those, to invest on those, and really good opportunity to support offshore wind development. So, again, if we get more resources, we might do a deeper dive on these local industries, again, to support um, not just the Department of Energy and the project developers, but also the other sectors, the fringe industries that we can develop equally um, as we, as we move along the offshore wind development in the country. It's a lot, but I think it can be done, since we've adopted that synergistic approach and collaborative approach. So these are tall order activities, but I think can be done in the next year and next years or so, for the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely, and like we've said, there's confidence in the market as well, and I think there's working collaboratively. It is looking really positive for the next few years.
Yes, yes, and I think that sort of fuels not just me but everyone from GWEC, right? So there's that. It's the fuel that keeps on giving, I'd say. I mean, you see how everyone is supportive, everyone is so optimistic about this technology, and most of the stakeholders are very much aligned. So it really fuels the my work, GWEC in general, and I'd say it's the same. I mean, it's the same for even for the government and the other key stakeholders within the sector.
Yeah, brilliant. So yes, Anne, thank you very much for your time today. Really insightful to hear
Thank
what
you.
GWEC are doing at the moment, and what's coming up in the future, and some of the exciting developments that you have planned. So thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you as well for giving me this opportunity to present what GWEC does, not just in APAC or globally, but focusing on the Philippines. So thank you for that.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and would like to learn more about GWEC's work in the region, you can head over to gwec.net/Southeast Asia Task Force to learn more about the Southeast Asia Task Force and the work they're doing with governments and organisations to drive the offshore wind energy industry. And if you're looking for new opportunities in the renewable energy industry, or you're an energy organisation that would benefit from specialist recruitment support to staff key renewables projects, get in touch with us at www.nesfircroft.com. Thanks for listening.